Greetings everyone, peace to you all. Welcome to another episode of Praiseworthy Reviews, where we go through video games to see if they are excellent and commendable. Today, we will be reviewing Balatro, a roguelike deck builder by solo developer LocalThunk. This game was lauded by many as one of the best games of 2024. But is it really that good? As usual, we will be evaluating the game based on 5 criteria: fun factor, educational value, cultural value, spiritual value, and cost. For context, prior to this review, I have beat a run on Gold Stake, the hardest difficulty, and I have completed every challenge run. So without further ado, let's jump in. Like all roguelikes, Balatro is a game about repeated attempts at completing a gauntlet of encounters. Even though the game is poker-themed, real-life poker skills don't really help here, other than the ability to calculate odds rather quickly. Instead, the game is more like a classic roguelike in many ways. To explain the gameplay mechanics, I will make comparisons to more combat-focused roguelikes. At the beginning of each run, the player selects a deck, of which there are around 15 main ones. Each deck is basically like a character, with different varied effects and even starting consumables. Each round, which is like an encounter, players build poker hands, which are basically like your attack types. You assemble cards into played hands, which win chips based on the type of hand played and the cards scoring in the hand. Similarly, that number is multiplied based on the type of hand played and any multipliers you may have in your cards. You can think of chips as the base attack of a card and multipliers as sort of power-ups for the attacks. Each round you have a hand limit and a discard limit, which means the number of times you can attack or swap cards respectively. You need to play hands in such a way that you will exceed the required chips, so you can think of the chip requirement or score as sort of HP for the enemies. Small and big blind are regular mobs and mini-bosses respectively, with the ante having a final boss blind. You can also get tags for skipping a blind, but you probably shouldn't skip until you get the hang of the game, since playing the blinds gives you more opportunities to earn money, see the shop, and activate cards or jokers that have permanent effects. Between rounds, players have access to shops unless you skip the blind, which contain a variety of things to purchase. There are vouchers, which generally provide permanent buffs for the run that take up those slots. There are jokers, which are like accessories or equipment that you can only have 5 of at a given time. They are the main way to increase your chip results and the primary thing you should be building around. There are tarot cards and planet cards, which are consumables that alter your deck or your hand levels, meaning your attacks. There are also standard cards, which will add cards to your deck. This may seem counterintuitive because in many deck builders, adding cards to your deck can often be a bad idea, but one thing to keep in mind is that the purchased standard cards may be enhanced with characteristics like gold, steel, rock, glass, lucky, etc., each of which generally makes a card better. Although deck building is still important, it is arguably less crucial than in other deck builders because the size of the decks are much larger and the individual impacts of specific cards much smaller. The meta progression for Balatro is a little weirder, with no real permanent currencies. Instead, meta progression is based off of the way you play. As you play in certain ways, new jokers, planet cards, or tarot cards are unlocked, adding them into the pool of things that you can purchase. The only real meta progression in the game is your skill. Even though the gameplay is relatively simple, the loop is quite addictive, and the types of jokers in the game really create a plethora of builds to try. However, one frustration that many people may have is that there are a lot of RNG elements. Personally, I don't have a lot of problems with roguelikes having a lot of RNG elements, but the sheer number of decks and jokers does mean that you can have a lot of false starts, which to some may be quite annoying. As a result, I'm going to give the game 4 stars for fun factor. As far as educational value is concerned, Balatro sharpens the same type of math skills many card games would in terms of statistics. Within each round, much of the strategy comes in deciding whether to maximize each hand or save cards for a significantly larger multiplier next hand. There is also some skill in sequencing of jokers and even sequencing of cards in played hands if some of the cards are special, but this is not initially obvious. Throughout the run, like other roguelikes, you also have to choose what kind of encounter strategy you have in terms of choosing what blinds to attempt or to skip and what items to purchase at shops. There's some interesting jokes in the naming of the cards, with many of the names often feeling quite clever. One of my favorite jokers is Spare Trousers, because they get buffed if you have 2 pairs. Dad joke lovers will definitely enjoy a lot of the nomenclature. Besides this, the math behind calculating the number of chips you can expect to win with a given hand and how different characteristics can impact your play can be surprisingly hard, so even though there is little factual or conceptual knowledge, I'm still going to give Balatro 5 stars for educational value. The artistic value of Balatro is highly debatable. The visual art on the cards, especially the jokers, can be quite interesting and unique on some of them, but really bland on others. Personally, I am not a fan of the retro style. I turned off the CRT filter immediately in favor of a more crisp screen. The music is also kind of retro and hokey, which I did not really enjoy, but the sound effects are useful as audio cues. There is no voice acting, of course, which is quite understandable. There is no real narrative either, which I am sad about because I think it could have been done. As far as cultural impact is concerned, Balatro has sold over 5 million copies in less than 1 year. It won the Best Indie Game at both Golden Joystick and the Game Awards, and it was nominated for overall Best Game of the Year for many of the award shows. Some critics have even suggested that this is a new subgenre of roguelikes, but honestly, I don't feel that it is. It's just a clever way to make a roguelike not about combat. Despite me generally not liking the artistic style of the game, the cultural impact is undeniable, so overall I'm going to assign 4 stars for its cultural value. As far as negative content, there's not really any in Balatro. No violence, no sex, no drugs, no crude language. However, there is gambling adjacent imagery. I say gambling adjacent because gameplay is not actually gambling. You never simulate gambling against other players or even bet points in any sort of Final Jeopardy style way of playing. However, it remains true that the game is based on poker hands and therefore by definition has some superficial association with gambling, even when there is no actual gambling. Some may also consider the booster packs gambling, but that will vary from person to person. Honestly though, for me, it was fine. Despite the lack of negative content, there is also very little positive content as well. There is no positive portrayals of anything, no positive message to get from the game. The ESRB rating of 10+ is pretty conservative in my humble opinion. To me, if you are willing to let a child play basically any kind of card game using a standard deck of 52 cards, then the game is fine. Also, I personally agree with the developer's opinion that the PEGI rating of 18+ is ridiculous and not really at all helpful to parents, but this has been changed recently. Because there is no narrative or message, there will be no biblical themes video for this game. Overall, I'm going to give Balatro 3 stars for its generally neutral spiritual value. For the time poor, it will probably take you somewhere between 5 and 10 hours to finish one run, which consists of defeating the boss blind on Ante 8. For the time rich, there is plenty to do once you beat a run. You can experiment with other decks and increase the difficulty through something called stakes. As you progress in stakes, the challenge in the game gets drastically harder, especially in purple, orange, and gold stakes. What really interested me though were the challenges, which are runs with extremely unusual starting conditions, rules, or decks. There are 20 of these challenges, and most of them are quite unique, with some being just plain fun and others being quite brutal. It took me about 75 hours to finish one deck on Gold Stake and to complete all the challenges. If I wanted to continue, I could finish other decks on Gold Stake and complete the collection. Balatro retails for $14.99 USD and can occasionally be found for 15% off, which I consider excellent value. Overall, based on the content value, I'm going to give Balatro 5 stars for cost. Balatro is an interesting and creative game that caught a lot of attention for good reason. While the game may be a little overhyped in that it's not really an entirely new genre, it's still a very original and clever take on roguelikes that feels minimalist and lean while still having incredible depth. The fact that the game was made by only one person is incredible, and honestly, it's about as good as a game can be without having better artistic value or more positive messages. Despite all the wonderful aspects of the gameplay, after playing the game for about 75 hours, I would say that even if I had played the game last year, it would not have been my most praiseworthy game of the year. Balatro is simply not one of those games that I'm very excited to play. That doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it or that it doesn't have its place. For me, it's very much a comfort game, a game that I come back to de-stress and experiment, which is probably why I played it much longer than I expected, despite not being super excited about it. Based on the criteria discussed in the video, I subjectively assign Balatro the rating of Genre Gem. That's all I have for you in this video. Bless you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If this video blessed you in some way, please consider watching some of my other videos, subscribing, or sharing with me some of your thoughts in the comments below.